Hello everyone. Hope everyone's doing okay. I hope everyone's handling their isolation okay. I know different people will handle it slightly differently. I've got to admit that for my part, I've been doing pretty okay. I'm an introvert, so I'm okay with being away from people for long periods of time. My job took place online, so I already worked from home, so I'm pretty privileged like that. And I also live with my boyfriend, so I'm not completely alone all the time. So all in all, I'm doing okay. I do go into slumps sometimes where I just don't feel like doing anything. So today I thought I'd bring you sort of a loose freeform type video. I haven't really prepared very much. Today I'm going to talk to you about all the books that I have in physical copy that I have not read. I thought maybe you would like to see my physical book collection, and hopefully it will also push me to take stock of what physical books I have and actually read some. So of my physical shelf, I think I have read about 60% of my books, and this is about 40%. I think altogether I have about 18 books here. I actually don't own that many physical copies of books. When I moved to the UK, I had to consolidate my book collection. I was aware that I was going to be living in small physical spaces, so I couldn't afford to have that many physical books. So since then, I've relied a lot more on audiobooks and ebooks to keep my reading up. But sometimes I get a physical book in a box, or I will buy a special edition of that book. And occasionally people just give me books. So this is most of where my physical collection comes from. So I will be going in roughly alphabetical order. I like organizing my books in alphabetical order. I don't really get the whole color-coded bookshelf thing. I'm just like, I don't know how I could ever find my books if I organized them like that. So how about it? Let's just talk about some books. So the first book I have here is Sigmund Freud's The Wolfman and Other Cases. So I think I got this on Valentine's Day 2 years ago. My boyfriend and I went on a date to the Freud Museum, and afterwards in the shop we decided to each get a Freud book, and I got this one. So this book, I think, is different case studies that Freud came across in his time of practicing. One of the most notable ones was the case of the Wolfman. This was the case of a man who constantly dreamed about wolves outside his window. I've got to say, I'm a little bit ambiguous about reading this book now. At the time when I bought this, I wanted to read more Freud and understand where Freud was coming from when he developed a lot of his theory. So Freud was definitely very foundational for a lot of work in psychological research, but nowadays I think a lot of people have agreed that his theories are quite outdated. Also, he had some pretty problematic ways of practicing, but I don't know. I might keep it around and maybe even see if my boyfriend wants to read it. He's trying to be a counselor right now. Next up is a book that I really want to read in 2020, and that is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is basically Pride and Prejudice, but set during the Industrial Revolution. So think of Pride and Prejudice, but a lot of discussions about workers' rights. So this book is about a woman called Margaret Hale, and she and her family have moved up north to a town called Milton, which is really a fictional version of Manchester. They have gone there because their financial status has changed. She meets a mill owner called John Thornton, and they have some opposing ideas about industry and workers' rights and philosophy. I have seen the BBC series. It is excellent. And also, I've been wanting to read a lot more Victorian literature this year. So yeah, this is definitely a book I am hoping to get around to very soon. All right, up next we have Ash, A Secret History by Mary Gentle. This is a chonky boy. So I have a friend from Portugal called Jan, and he knew that I really like historical fantasy. He asked me, have you read this book? I said no, and he said, you have to read this book. I will send you my copy. And he sent me his copy. And I've looked it up online. Apparently it is a very acclaimed work of historical fantasy. I don't know much about it apart from that. I know it takes place in medieval Europe and there's a very strong central female character. But this is looking like an endeavor for Tome Topple. So I might put it on my TBR for the next one. I think the next one is coming up in May. Next up, I have 20 Miles by Kara Headley. This copy was given to me by my boyfriend's mom. This appears to be a book about ice hockey. So it's about a girl called Isabel who leaves her family behind to play for a big, hard, tough ice hockey team. So this is a story about her trying to find her place in the team and about their kinship together. I have to admit, it's not the first book I would have picked up for myself, but my boyfriend's mom told me that she thinks I would like it, so sure, I'll probably get around to it at some point. So here we have my German edition of Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. I think one thing that I try to do every year is read more German, and of course I don't always get around to that because I'm so much slower reading in German than I am in English, obviously. But I always want to read more German because it really helps with reading comprehension and my language skills, my grammar skills, and of course it helps with reading German news online because I follow several German newspapers. I was on a visit to my friend Anna Chris in Germany a few years back, and she told me that this is a very profound, excellent novel. This is Hermann Hesse's take on the journey of Siddhartha, who is the man who would eventually become the Buddha. It's not too long. Apparently the language isn't too opaque, so hopefully this is something that I can get around to. Up next we have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I believe this came in an Owl Crate box, I think in the September one. This was their extra book that they included with the main book, but this is supposed to be a classic horror novel. I have been wanting to read more horror personally, so I might have mentioned in my booktube newbie tag that I love creative writing and my favorite genre to write in is historical fantasy. I've been feeling lately that I might benefit as a fantasy writer from reading more horror and learning from some of the storytelling techniques. And apparently Shirley Jackson is a great place to start. I've also been wanting to read more Stephen King this year, but that might be a stretch given my current reading goals. But this might be a great read around autumn, Halloween times. Next up we have Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. This is on my TBR for the Owls Readathon. I think this is my Care of Magical Creatures book because there is an animal with a beak on the cover. So it's about a girl who is a seamstress and wants to make it big time as a tailor, but she is a woman, so she's just expected to marry well. So she disguises herself as her father's son and she goes to compete as an imperial tailor. So that's pretty cool. And also Asian Readathon is coming up, so I think this is a great book to get myself pumped for that. Next up we have The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones. So I think this book involves grave digging and the dead coming to life. All I know is that this was the book that came with The Haunting of Hill House back in September. So I've read Emily Lloyd Jones' The Hearts We Sold, which I thought was alright. So this is supposed to be kind of a mix of fairy tale and horror, which I'm down. I love it. Next up we have Nocturna by Maya Motena. So I've heard people describe this as a darker shade of magic, but diverse. So yeah, it's about a girl who uses her face shifting powers to steal from people, and there is a prince who dabbles in forbidden magic. Yeah, that sounds like darker shade of magic. I think Cindy from Read with Cindy talked about this and was kind of meh about it. That makes me a little bit scared to read it. So if you have read this and you enjoyed it, let me know. Because I received this in a Fairy Loot box. I didn't pick this book myself, so I'm just wondering if it's worth reading. Next up is Song of Sorrow by Melinda Salisbury. This is the sequel to State of Sorrow. I put State of Sorrow in my list of underhyped fantasy books. So this is the sequel, presumably dealing with some of the fallout of the previous book. That book ended on a terrible cliffhanger. I got this copy at Yawk last year. It is beautiful, especially these sprayed edges. They're amazing. I'm also hoping to get around to this book eventually because I do like Melinda Salisbury as a writer. I have been enjoying this series. Another book that I received from Fairy Loot is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I think this is also a book from last year. So this is about a girl called Spensa who lives in an outer space colony that has been under attack by an alien race. Spensa wants to be a pilot, but her family is currently in disgrace because her father allegedly deserted while he was also a pilot. So I've heard this is kind of like a gender-bent Ender's Game, and I've heard people praise it very highly. I am personally a little bit tentative about Brandon Sanderson's YA because I read Steelheart, which I believe is the first book of his Reckoners series. I was not a massive fan of that book. I just thought it was okay. I didn't feel the need to read the next books, but people have really talked this one up, so I'm hoping to get around to this one this year. Next up, we have Wayward Son by Rainbow Rowell. This is, of course, the sequel to Carry On. This is another book that I am nervous about because some people have really loved this one, but other people have found it massively disappointing. They thought the story was kind of pointless and meandering. So apparently this is basically Simon and Baz going on an American road trip, and I'm like, okay, sure, I'm sure you can do something with that idea. I mean, I loved Carry On so much. It's such a book that puts me in my happy place. So I'm hoping this is the same, but from what I'm hearing, this might not be the case. So we'll just have to read it and see. Next up, we have Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. I actually don't have a physical copy of Vicious, which is the book that came before this one. Am I a weirdo or what? But yeah, I bought this book at Yalk this past summer because it was literally one of the only books left to have signed by V.E. Schwab. But if you're not familiar, Vicious was a book about two men called Eli and Victor. They collaborate together on a university project on discovering how people get their superpowers. Something goes terribly wrong, and 10 years later, they are arch enemies. So I'm not sure how you can proceed from the end point of Vicious, but apparently she wrote a very long sequel, so she found something to write about. I know Sam from Thoughts on Tomes also thought this was kind of pointless as a sequel, but I kind of want to find out for myself. Because I liked Vicious, I liked the idea, I really liked the character work, it was a really compelling concept. From the look of it, I think we're focusing on characters apart from Victor and Eli. That's interesting. But yeah, some people love this book, some people are kind of meh about it, so we'll see. Next up is A Conjuring of Light, also by V.E. Schwab. So I just finished A Gathering of Shadows, which is the book that comes before this in the Shades of Magic series. So this is the last book. This is it. We're finally here. A Gathering of Shadows also ended on a massive cliffhanger, so this is going to be very interesting because I feel like A Gathering of Shadows spent a lot of time setting up the events of this book. It was almost a bridge between the first book and this book, which was fine. I still liked it, but it definitely didn't have the same narrative tension that was in the first book. But this is a lot of people's favorite book in the series, so I'm optimistic about this. I think this is going to be good. I've really enjoyed exploring the world and getting to know it and getting to know how magic works. And along the way, we've been watching a lot of characters become more powerful. So I'm looking forward to reading this book and finally finishing this series. Next up, we have Scavenge the Stars by Tara Sim. I believe I received this in January's Owl Crate, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is supposed to be a gender-bent Count of Monte Cristo. So the main character is this girl called Amaya who's been held captive on a slave ship for years, and she's out for revenge for people who put her there. I've read some Goodreads reviews and some people liked it, but some people who know the Count of Monte Cristo really well were iffy about how good of a retelling this was. I have read Count of Monte Cristo. I enjoyed it, so it'll be interesting for me. I liked that book, but it wasn't an intense favorite like it is for some other people. I guess it's up to me to decide if those are things that I can accept. I am kind of ambiguous about gender-bent retellings of stories. Sometimes they can be done well, but sometimes the gender bending can change a lot of fundamental things about the story that the author doesn't really pick up on or properly revise. So this will be interesting, but I'm a little nervous about it though. I think I skipped over a book actually. So this is Der Vorleser by Bernhard Schlink. I think in one of my videos I've talked about my embarrassing history with this book. Basically, I've been reading it for almost 8 years. I've read the first 60 pages or so, and I haven't gone past that point. I am slow at reading German. So this novel takes place in Germany before, during, and after the Second World War. The main character starts out as a teenager and he meets this much older woman and has an affair with her. It's a little bit icky, but in any case, she disappears and he does not see her again until after the war, when he finds out a really terrible secret about her. As far as my intermediate German reading skills are concerned, this is a very beautifully written book. I'm really hoping to get around to this again. I know it's a classic. This is also on my 2020 TBR, so I really should read it. Next up, we have The Phantom Coach, which is a collection of Victorian ghost stories. So this appears to be a compendium of several stories by people like Charles Dickens and Rudyard Kipling. Oh, and Arthur Conan Doyle. But yeah, this is another book that my boyfriend's mom let me keep. So I said before that I've been really wanting to read more Victorian literature, and also I really love reading and writing Victorian fantasy. So I think reading some ghost stories, some horror from that era would be a huge help to me. So of course, I'm really interested in reading horror from that era. And finally, we have Circle of Shadows by Evelyn Skye. This sits on the far end of my shelf, and sometimes I even forget this book is there, but I did get it last year in a fairy loot as well. This is about a pair of apprentice warriors who infiltrate a suspicious group of soldiers in their country. So they're acting as spies. So I guess they're on a mission of deception of sorts. But yeah, beyond receiving this in Fairy Loot, I feel like I've not heard much about this book. Like, I've seen it around and I kind of notice it on my shelf sometimes, but it never occurs to me to really read it. I don't feel like there's a lot of hype around it, so let me know if you have read this and liked it. Also, before I forget about them, here are these 3 books. So these are part of the William Shakespeare Star Wars series by Ian Desher. So these are the books based on the Star Wars prequel trilogy. So we have The Phantom of Menace, The Clone Army Attacketh, and The Tragedy of the Sith's Revenge. But I'm really looking forward to reading these. I really enjoyed the books based on the original trilogy, as well as the one for Force Awakens. I love these Shakespearean reinterpretations of the Star Wars outfits. There's also these really awesome illustrations. Controversial opinion, I am a prequels fan. I don't think they're perfect at all. I think they do have a very clunky start. The Phantom Menace doesn't really propel the story forward very much, but it features one of my favorite characters in all of fiction, Anakin Skywalker. I relate to him so much as a character, and he's one of the most dynamic and complicated characters of the Star Wars universe. So I am looking forward so much to seeing him Shakespeareified. So that is it for my complete physical TBR, all of my unread physical books. Let me know down below if you have read any of these books and if you took a shine to any of them. If there's a book that you think I should read now, urgently, let me know in comments. I'm making plans for another slightly more ambitious video this week, so I'll be coming to you soon in a couple days. In the meantime, like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you want more of this content. You can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads and Instagram, and I will see you in my next video.